Welcome to Discovery 23. In our first episode of Discovery 23, we are going to answer what an Alan Derpowitz asks in St. Louis Today forums. What about the current cultural paradox of Madonna and the New Brigade giving Lenin succor while Margaret Thatcher was obviously recording myself and other contrarian partisans in the fight against multi-generational obliviousness? I've been asked to explain that. And I'd certainly be happy to. Again, welcome to Discovery 23. Fact is, my granny was a Midwest woman, lived to her 90s. She was married for 66 years to my grandfather. Where they met was still a country road. Well, she used to tell me to remember the good. Contrarians tend to regard selective memory as selective representation. And so they remember the bad because so many people choose to remember the good. And this has reactionary characteristics of today's political regime, in which this question is situated and framed as a cultural paradox. I like to say that the dead should not haunt the living. I was resurrected. I was asked this question. I don't consider it haunting anybody. But the New Brigade, I know nothing about. Madonna, I know bits and pieces because of her legend and things that she has communicated by talking sideways. Margaret Thatcher, of course, was characterized as Reagan's poodle, a rather ferocious poodle, more resembling the rabbit Kyle Banner from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So the question is there a current cultural paradox in the idea of Madonna and the New Brigade giving Lenin succor while the regime of the West was secretly involved in peep and spy camp? Because purportedly or assumedly and probably even their victims were partisans in the fight against multi-generational obliviousness. Let's talk for a minute about what multi-generational obliviousness means. Multi-generational obliviousness can be charged to selective memory, remembering only the good. I'll give you a fairly good example of multi-generational obliviousness that's playing out today. And it pertains to the role of insubordination in American society. Selective memory might call American heritage agrarian and nonviolent. We had the activities of the suffragettes, and before the suffragettes, the people who resisted World War I. And looking for the roots of America's foreign policy and rise to a world power, we have to examine Grover Cleveland and his South American resistance to British encroachment in our hemisphere. There are things that pertain to nonviolence that arise from the abolitionists, not all of whom were nonviolent, but whose sympathies were to protect others from violence, and that's what made them violent. The actual movement to defend the peaceful should be a sort of holy writ in the American character. And Martin Luther King reminded us of this again and again. So the question of what is a contrary partisan in the fight against multi-generational obliviousness can be seen in the question of the meaning of insubordination in American society. The reason why the presidency is both the executive branch and commander in chief is that there's a distinction in American society. Civilian control is at the helm through the process of democratic voting. Now, there have been incidents of people who've been insubordinate, and of course, when it comes to our culture as a whole, the civilian culture does have open mic bullies. We do have gangs. We do have people who enforce or perceive the idea of insubordination as an honor code. It's not one. Martial societies do not dominate the civilian sector in law and philosophy. The truth is that the honor code that civilian society is dominated by is live and let live, the enfranchisement of the other person's choice. This is the reason why it was possible for a professor of higher learning to say to me, the more involved the criticism, the higher the compliment. Because it means that you respect the other person enough to share what you think might be helpful with them. And they don't feel insulted because they're looking for subordination, praise, public relations, and lip service. Now, the difference between lip service, praise, insubordination in military is that when it comes to actually protecting the peace, the military have to be in line with civilian authority. It's unfortunate sometimes, and it can be unfair when good ideas get shut down or hardworking men and women die in the cause of duty. And that's one of the reasons why we need to put and invest a great deal more in keeping the peace honorably through diplomatic engagement of our so called adversaries, people like ourselves, often misunderstood. This doesn't mean that there aren't people who are out to cause havoc. The human species has difficulty grasping their obligations to one another. Insubordination in the ranks, however, has had a perilous history. One of the central problems of our society's existence and our world's existence, and the problem of our species, is that a terrifying irregularity occurred in the 1930s with the development of the radio, which is that under the hood, Disney, Eisenstein, and spectacle mongers from the Italian futurist movements came up with the era of the great dictators. It's sad as hell. One of the things that we're dealing with in multi-generational is obliviousness, is that we have to see what happened under the hood. And there are contrarian partisans who do a fairly reputable job of disentangling some of these things. Certainly, I try to look under the hood of the 1930s to show the fallacy that had given rise to an admiration for the era of the great dictators, which is based on personality cults and simple mindedness. Insubordination has a great deal of hostility towards it in the dictatorial mind. As a result, people can misperceive wayward authority as somehow automatically fighting the good fight. It isn't. General MacArthur got off the ground suppressing domestic peaceful demonstrators in Washington, D.C. against the orders of President Hoover. He used brutal force on them. He then veered from the direct orders of Truman to engage the Chinese in North Korea. Although he was greeted as a hero, his familiars were people like General Edwin Walker and Oliver North, who violated the duty to Congress, heaped contempt on our civil norms. And Edwin Walker was one of Kennedy's assassins, an enemy of the peace. So when Russia said in the 80s that America has trouble taming their own hawks, they were wise words. I think we need to give credit where credit is due. We need to seek out wisdom across the board. But one of the things that we're up against among ourselves is that one of the powers that has been developed for domination by the United States and is used against our own people by the European Union and NATO and the oligarchs, and of course by Russia, is the art of deception. It gets glamorized and romanticized by Access Hollywood. So I'm making a recording because I'm not afraid of you, you spy cam people. You should be ashamed. The paradox of Madonna and the New Brigade giving Lenin succor has to do with the fact that neither of them realized that Lenin pulled a Houdini. Madonna had this adage, if I cry for you, I'll let you go. All of the horrors that are listed in my poem, The Kennedy Surrender, on All Poetry, was advocacy of people like Madonna for a terroristic car thief assassin who tore my head off as a child. All of it is common sense would tell you not to do that. One of the partners of this man to this day is fighting charges of recent bomb threats. And yet they want him embraced because of his symbolic value to Margaret Thatcher and the New Brigade. That's the paradox, is that these people pretending to be contrary to one another are secretly working together. So the truth comes out that it's not paradoxical. The people who knew that Lenin pulled a Houdini are working with the people who did not know that he pulled a Houdini. And they found common grounds in terroristic mayhem towards innocent people. It's hard to be surprised. They probably enfranchised by saying, well, Lenin was an insubordinate um, um, predator himself. Why should anybody expect better from anybody else when they're defending him? I don't know what to say to any of it. So I'll stop trying to say anything. You know what they say, at least what I do. A ghost really shouldn't haunt the living.